Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah, salatu wa rasulullah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. So, if you guys are keeping track, by the end of tonight, we will be 20% done with the Quran, and we'll be 1/5 of the way through the month of Ramadan. So, it's quick. It does not feel like that. It feels like it just started yesterday. And so, shortly, at the end of the month, we're going to be telling ourselves, where did the time go? How did it go by so quickly? And we're wishing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would bless us with more Ramadans in the future. So for every time your feet hurt in salah, appreciate that. Show that gratitude to Allah that He is allowing your feet to hurt so that you're purified on these nights. Every time your back tightens a little bit, appreciate it. Every time your eyelid starts to kind of feel heavy, appreciate it. You know, Qari Ubaid's Qira'ah gives us a lot of peace. So sometimes our eyes can be a little heavy, but appreciate it, right? Your neck might feel a little bit strained from looking down. Appreciate all that pain, all that struggle, because all of it is a purification for us, inshaAllah ta'ala. So we're in the 6th juz, and the Quran begins at, the 6th juz of the Quran begins at verse 148 of Surah An-Nisa, and it ends at verse 41 of Surah Ma'idah. And Surah Ma'idah was revealed many years after Surah An-Nisa. And Surah Ma'idah is known as the last largest surah to be revealed in the Quran. And it was revealed after the conquest of Mecca, when the Muslims were finally in a position of power. So during this phase of power, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he began to send letters to kings and various other countries to invite them to and their people to Islam. And so many of the themes in Surah Al-Ma'idah have to do with justice, have to do with interacting with the people of the book, and so it's very relevant for the time that it was revealed. So as we saw in the first few surahs of the Quran, they give us a glimpse of the Medinan phase of history. Surah Al-Baqarah shows us what Islam was like before Badr. Surah Al-Imran shows us what it was like, and Surah An-Nisa what it was like after Uhud. And now Surah Al-Ma'idah shows us the final phases of the da'wah and the perfection of the law. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, الْيَوْمَ أَكْمَلْتُ لَكُمْ دِينَكُمْ وَأَتْمَمْتُ عَلَيْكُمْ نِعْمَتِي وَرَضِيتُ لَكُمُ الْإِسْلَامَ دِينًا. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that today I have perfected faith for you, and I have completed my favor upon you, and I've chosen Islam as your way. And so after the conquest of Mecca, Surah Al-Ma'idah essentially revolves around the two themes of the principles of da'wah and the people of the book and other nations. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu awfu bil uqud. Right? This is in the beginning of the surah. And this is a call for us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, O believers, honor your obligations. Take your contracts seriously. Take your promises that you give to other people seriously. Not only just with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but with other people as well. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He describes some of the final laws of Islam, talking about what is permissible to eat and what is not permissible to eat. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ أُحِلَّ لَكُمُ الطَّيِّبَاتُ, that to look for the pure things to eat. Look for the things that are halal to eat. You know, especially in a country where it's more difficult for us to find halal food, this is a struggle that is praiseworthy for everybody. We live, alhamdulillah, very comfortable lives. This is one of those things that it's okay for us to struggle in a little bit, to try to find as halal food as possible, to try to find as pure food as possible so that we consume. You know, there are many narrations of the Prophet Muhammad that talk about how our haram consumption can actually be a reason for us to not have our du'as accepted. So, just that little effort we have to put in of maybe spending a few extra dollars for halal meat, or going out of our way to find a halal restaurant, or going out of our way to eat a halal meal, a pure meal, a tayyib meal for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the midst of all our comfort and all our joy, what small struggle do we have there just for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And inshallah Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be pleased with us. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He reminds us that although now you are in this position of power, talking to Rasulullah ﷺ and the companions, and there's this post-victory, you have to fulfill your promises with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and remember your obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because that victory lies in the obedience of Allah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاذْكُرُوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ وَمِيثَاقَهُ الَّذِي وَاثَقَكُمْ بِهِ. That remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's favor upon you and the covenant He made with you when you said, إِذْ قُلْتُمْ سَمِعْنَا وَأَطَعْنَا. We hear and we obey. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهِ. And be mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إِنَّ اللَّهَ عَلِيمٌ بِذَاتِ الصُّدُورِ. And Allah truly knows what's best and what is hidden in the hearts. And so, in this verse, and then it continues until verse 11 of Surah Al-Ma'idah, but in between those two verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us that we have to remain firm upon justice. That actually the beautiful verses, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا كُونُوا قَوَّامِينَ لِلشُّهَدَاءِ بِالْقِسْطِ وَلَا يَجْرِمَنَّكُمْ شَنَآنُ قَوْمٍ عَلَىٰ أَلَّا تَعْدِلُوا اعْدِلُوا وَهُوَ أَقْرَبُ لِلتَّقْوَى وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ إِنَّ اللَّهَ خَبِيرٌ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ. O believers, stand firm for Allah and bear true testimony. Do not let the hatred of a people lead you to injustice. This is extremely important. In a time where there is a lot of backlash against Muslims, in a time where there is a lot of opposition against Islam, one of our reactions can often be to treat those who treat us negatively the same way they treat us. But that's not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger taught us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's Messenger told us to always take the high road, always rise above insults, always rise above the injustice, and be the one yourself to be the example of justice. And so in order to remain firm in that, we cannot express hatred and negativity to other people the same way they may express it to us. We have to be the ones to carry that higher route. And then a large portion of the surah focuses on the story of Isa alayhi salam. And as the Muslims were interacting more with Christians in this phase, it reminds us about the Tawheed. And it basically reminds us about Tawheed, and it also has a lot of refutations against the Trinity in this surah. And so it invites Christians to Islam frequently throughout this surah. And Surah Al-Ma'idah also includes the story of Cain and Abel, right? Habil and Qabil, the two sons of Adam alayhi salam, from verse 27 to 32. And this passage is a very famous reminder that when someone kills an innocent person, it is equivalent in sin as someone that kills all of humanity. And saving just a soul earns the reward as if you had saved all of humanity. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and our religion honors every single life, honors every single soul. And this is the beauty of our religion. And then Surah Al-Ma'idah also contains many warnings about trying to tamper with the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in these verses we are warned that those who were given previous scriptures, they tried to change the law, and they will be held accountable for this on the last day. And so any blatant attempt to change Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's laws are classified as a type of disbelief in the surah. And this is important because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَفَحُكْمُ الْجَاهِلِيَّةَ يَبَغُونَ وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ مِنَ اللَّهِ حُكْمًا لِقَوْمِ يُوقِنُونَ. That is it the judgment of pre-Islamic ignorance that they seek? What could be better? Who could be better as a judge than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for people that have sure faith? And so in our time, my brothers and sisters, in our time, sometimes there's a strong push from maybe some vocal minorities to change aspects of our deen in order to fit modern ideas, in order to change fundamental aspects of our religion and morality. It's challenged in order to try to meet contemporary ideals. So people will try to reinterpret the Quran and Sunnah to fit these modern ideologies. And so this verse warns us very strongly against that, because the claim is progress. The claim is we want to progress forward. But if you look at the time of Jahiliyyah, what did the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam come to progress humanity to? Because during the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, before his message, it is without a doubt, the historians say, this is the darkest period of humanity. And in 23 short years, he turned them from the darkest to the brightest time in humanity. After 23 years, the companions were the greatest people that the world has ever seen. And so what were some of the things that they were doing before? What are some of the things that those who were in ignorance doing before? They were engaging in riba. They were engaging in riba. They were killing those who are innocent. They were killing their children right as they were born and even before they were born. They were engaging in illicit sexual behavior and indecent acts that were prohibited from nations previously. So much
darkness. And these are the things that the pre-Islamic ignorance was doing. And so the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ progressed humanity forward and got rid of all these ills of society. And so now these things are coming back in the name of progress. But in reality, it's a regression. This is what we've come out of before. And so, my brothers and sisters, we do not have this mentality that this world is lost and society is done and the hope is all done and we're screwed and all this kind of stuff. This is nonsense. Because the Prophet ﷺ said that whoever says the people are destroyed, he is the one who is destroyed. Because we always have hope, we always have optimism. And I've said it multiple times before, and I'll say it again. We have that same light and message today. But now it's not just on one person's shoulder, it's on the shoulders of 2 billion people. To be that kuntum khayru ummatin ukhrijat lin-nas. And to clarify what I mean by that, I don't also mean that somehow that just because of our identity as a Muslim, that we're somehow God's chosen people, like others like to claim because of their identity. To be God's chosen person is by living by His obedience. To be God's chosen person is by living by His revelation and following His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. No identity that we have, how we were born or where we were born, has anything to do with that. And that's the beauty of our religion, that everybody can be God's chosen person. But you decide. You get to pick who that will be. And so the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is perfect. It's the best system of governance, back then and today. And it's built into this system. There are methods of flexibility built within it. But that is why we have the scholars to adjust so that they know what are the limits and what are not the limits and what are the considerations and not the considerations. And they take place, these adjustments, within their own principles. But we're not allowed to just involve changes of the law entirely itself, because the law itself is sacred. And the law will forever stand as the best and perfect way of life that leads to best in this world and in the next world. And that's our Islamic worldview, my brothers and sisters. We are built on actively working to build a moral society. And we are built on the principle of commanding righteousness and forbidding evil. Al-amr bil-ma'ruf wa-nahy an al-munkar. These are essential for developing truly a moral society. And Rasulullah ﷺ said, whoever among you sees an evil, let him change it with his hand, and if he cannot do so, then with his tongue, and if he cannot do so, then with his heart, which is the weakest of faith. So there are levels. There are levels. And the last but not least, we as Muslims need to prioritize preaching Islam and spreading the message to others, because that light cannot be a selfish light. That light needs to be brought about the entire world in order for good to establish across the globe. We want goodness for others the same way that we want it for ourselves. And we want people to embrace that optimal way of life and live accordingly. This should inspire us to actively be involved in da'wah and calling people to the truth. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, by Allah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides a man through you is better for you than having a herd of expensive red camels. In modern terms, expensive red Ferraris, baby. That is the modern term. So it is better for somebody to bring someone to Islam than that. Right? When there's a lot of da'wah efforts that go on around. We have Saeed here. My boy Saeed right here, mashallah. Uplift da'wah. They always do da'wah in Seattle. Get involved in these da'wah efforts. Spread the lights to the people as much as possible and bring people towards that good. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum.